And so one of the things that I find that's important for business owners to realize is to put their consumer hat on when they're sitting there running their own company. Because those customers that are purchasing your company, purchasing your products, they're purchasing your company. They are actually putting their trust in the entire company. And so the entire company or the entire business, my point is the product you're offering the world, not necessarily the widget that you're selling. And that realization is incredibly important to actually being successful, in my opinion.
Welcome to B2P, B2B Business and Podcasting, the ultimate podcast for B2B business owners who want to grow their brand, expand their reach, and generate more leads. Join myself, CEO of Momish Mavericks, Maynard Breslow, as I interview top industry leaders, share best business practices, and explore innovative techniques to integrate into your overall B2B marketing strategy. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the B2P Business and Podcasting Show. Grateful to have you all here, and grateful to have as well Shawn Khorrami. He is here. He is the CEO of ePlaybook. Thanks for joining us today, Shawn.
Hey, thanks for having me, by the way.
Yeah, the
It's a
pleasure's
pleasure to be here.
yeah, thank you. The pleasure's all mine. Grateful to have you on. And today we'll be talking about you, your background, obviously ePlaybooks. What does this all mean? But also talking about some great important topics such as how your business is your product, and we'll get into what that means exactly, and also how to run a tight budget while not being cheap, which is something that probably, as we were mentioning before we came on the air, probably a lot of startups needed to know a decade ago, and a lot of those startups probably aren't around. But as you mentioned, there's that trend has changed a lot. So we'll talk about what that, how to really get the most out of what you have, the resources you have now, and and making that grow to where we want it to be. So yeah, once again, before we get started into all that, tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of what's led to ePlaybooks.
Yeah, I'm a serial entrepreneur. Started more than a dozen companies from the ground up with me as employee one and grown them to 8, 9-figure businesses. Not everything was a resounding success. I'm sure we'll talk about some failures as we go along and as we're talking. And this basically anything from a few hundred employees to a few thousand employees. I have degrees in mathematics, computer science, economics. I have a law degree and substantial formal education in accounting, marketing,
Wow.
and sales. Kind of the backbone of how what I thought you would need to run a business. And by the way, I don't think you need that formal education in order to be successful at anything. It's just for me, cramming information into my brain and getting a theoretical framework for something was incredibly important. Also, maybe I'm a little bit lazy and I like spending time at school. But um, aside, aside from
Yeah.
that, all I've done my entire life has been running my own company. So in some ways, I have the unique position of being in a place where I haven't received a W-2 from any company I haven't actually owned. But that comes with its shortcomings. I always say everything's a gift and a curse. So I haven't been on the other side of having a direct boss either. Although I've been in front of boards of directors plenty of times.
Yeah, sometimes that board is our boss, and sometimes our clients feels like having clients. Sometimes that can feel like our boss.
For sure.
At the very least, hold us
Absolutely.
accountable, right? Because as you know, entrepreneurship, there's whether you have a big team or not, right? It can sometimes be lonely because we have to come up with everything and do a lot, regardless of how many people are helping us and everything like that. So, and I love it too how you said. I mean, you look like a young guy, but it sounds like you've went to school for like 20 years. And serial entrepreneur, started all these different businesses, like you've been doing it forever, right? I mean, you mentioned that you don't recommend necessarily have that kind of formal training. Do you feel like you did get a lot out of it though? Stuff that you've applied now? I mean, probably accounting. I could have used that a little bit better, to be honest, But being a lawyer, getting a law degree, all these different things, how has that kind of fared in what you've done? I was a psych major. I was in and out, got myself done, but I do feel like what I learned in psychology, I was, going to go to med school, all that. But I do feel like I do apply a lot of that on a pretty regular basis, with marketing and everything like that. Do you feel like the things that you've invested your time in have come in and it's been a good use of your time and what you set out to do?
Yeah, it's sort of like I briefly mentioned it. The way my brain works, I need to have a kind of a general understanding of any concept, anything that I'm engaging in. And once I do, then I can navigate and get into the details of it a lot better because I understand how it's supposed to work. For me, formal education taught me a lot of that, both thinking that way and understanding a lot of things in the world that way. So, sort of having this theoretical framework. And like I said, I like cramming a bunch of information into my brain before I really get involved in something. And so, again, that I felt was incredibly important. But the reason I say, well, you don't really need it is that you don't really need
Yeah.
it. There's a lot of things. One, you can be self-taught. Two, the world will teach you a whole lot of things as you go along. And three, you know, as you're learning the different things within a business, you see how the inconsistencies of knowing it theoretically as well. They don't necessarily match up.
Yeah.
So you need both. To the extent you have a formal education or any sort of theoretical framework, you definitely need the real life for sure. But you don't necessarily, I don't think it necessarily translates the other way, that if you have the real life experience, you necessarily need the theoretical framework.
No, definitely, I agree that in terms of entrepreneurship, the main skill is that experience, being able to, like you said. I mean, when I was going to school, they didn't really have it, but nowadays, kids, they have a major for entrepreneurship, and I think that's amazing. I think it's great, and you're able to go through products or projects and kind of develop businesses, and some businesses actually end up coming out of that. And people start businesses based on what they were doing in college. And I guess for us, it was more like the school of hard knocks, meaning that like a lot of things you learn theoretically don't necessarily apply until you get there. And it's the same thing as going to the gym, right? You can learn everything about the mechanics of how your muscles and the anatomy of it, and you can learn all about how the each machine or each motion is going to be affecting each muscle. But it doesn't mean much unless you actually go to the gym and lift the weights, right? And so
Yep.
I think that is the same kind of thing with entrepreneurship. And you've, as you mentioned, I think dozens of companies. And so tell me about ePlaybooks and what you're doing now and how that was kind of shaped. What our listeners know about that?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because it came about sort of the way I come about with companies. I see a problem and I try to fix it, and it develops into something much bigger a lot of times. And ePlaybooks came out of really, you know, over time what would happen is people were coming to me with different issues, always in a time of crisis. Something terrible had happened or something great had happened. Both can be crises, as you know. And they would say, "Hey, help me fix this." So that sort of created this entire mentorship program that I had, where people would come to me and say, "Oh yeah, can you help me with this or help me with that?" Certainly, that came with some business ventures out of it, but over time, as I consulted and talked to more and more of these, you know, mentees, I guess, for lack of a better word, had. I developed, you know, three different buckets of generally challenges that small and medium-sized businesses had. And so when someone would come to me, I'd be, "Oh, okay, you're in this bucket, or you're in all three buckets, or two of them." So over time, again, just the way my brain works, what happened was I said, "Okay, well, why don't I just take one of these buckets and put together a team and start working with businesses in this one bucket, one challenge I'll pick, and then." From there, we can grow into a much more robust relationship. Out of that grew ePlaybooks. We start working with small and medium-sized businesses, starting with a single sales channel, and then we grow from there.
Amazing. Yeah. So tell me, I love that kind of concept of how you notice these buckets that each company. Can you give me a little bit more in depth? It really intrigued me on our pre-call. What are these three buckets that you keep seeing over and over again, right? I think just before even answering it, I think sales revenue is always like a bucket that people like. I got a great product, but I don't know how to actually sell it. And people, and maybe a cash flow issue where people have great product and they have sales, but for some reason they just kind of always in the red, and this can destroy companies, right? And maybe the opposite, where people have great sales and but their product sucks and people keep returning, and they never can get off they have all this business coming in, but they have all these fires to put out. Those are just three that come to my mind. I don't know if you've done this a lot longer than me and with a lot more companies. So tell me the three buckets that you've really seen that companies struggle with the most.
So I'm kind of more general than that. I would, you're exactly right. You're a little bit more specific about the things that you're saying, but all of those things fall into those same buckets that I have. You're identifying the very same things. So the first one was logistics and supply chains, the way I look at things. Second one had to do with marketing, and overemphasis on new customer acquisition, which ended up ignoring the vast majority of the marketing that you do. And then the third was sales channels. And so I would always find something in there, particularly as time developed over the past 10 years. I would find, I could put businesses and their problems into these buckets and then start fixing it from there. So the way that so I came up with which bucket I was going to approach people with was I looked at, logistics, and I said, okay, that's not exactly the sexiest part of a business. When you talk to SMBs, they
Which is
don't,
why some
they sort of
companies
sit
suck
there
at
and
it,
go, oh
right?
yeah, but that's the back end, kind of metaphorically too, the back end of the business. I'm not that interested about that. Although I always use this quote from General Eisenhower, who said that campaigns and wars are won and lost generally on logistics alone. Businesses are like that too. People miss that. You don't do things right on the logistics side. You don't do things right on your supply chains, and you can be out of business in a pretty short amount of time.
Yeah.
But that wasn't something that I wanted to start with. What I did do is pick sales channels. They're just as challenging. And what I noticed was over the past 10 years, as I started concentrating with businesses, it's a very aggressively shifting landscape. And that comes from how certain things that were seemingly unrelated before have developed. And I can get into that if and when you want. That shifting landscape, what I noticed, would cause people to be jumping on different sales channels at the wrong time for their business at the time, and not being enough on the right ones that would allow them to actually have growth and do it in a way that allows the business to expand and be, be around in 2 years from now.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And so I love that about especially logistics, and it's not the sexiest thing, and that's probably why it gets ignored a lot, And sales on the other end seems sexy, but I think it takes a certain type of person, or at least willingness, to learn those channels and to master those channels, even if the CEO, oftentimes they have to be the salesperson, right? And especially when they're raising money, and that's kind of the thing, right? And so I think that kind of plays into a little bit of your whole kind of motto here of how the business is the product, right? Your business is your product. Talk to me what that means. I see that it's kind of like how you lead with everything, and so what does that actually mean? Your product.
It's actually the title of my book that's coming out
Amazing.
in the next, I want to say within the next 30 days, it'll be out.
That's great.
So, and it's something that I've been saying for a number of years. When someone comes to you and they actually are starting a business, or they're starting to run their own business, they'll say, okay, well, I got this product, I got this patent, I got this and the other. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And that's the way they sort of describe their business. And it's very important to actually see the transition that happens. That's the person as the business owner. That same person as a consumer, when you say, okay, well, you buy this X product, this widget, why do you buy it? And as they describe to you why they're purchasing that product, what you'll hear from them is all of these other things that certainly they'll say, oh, all these features that the product has, but also say, oh, this company does this. I like the way they do their quality assurance. I like the way they deal with customers. And they have all of these other things that they talk about. But as soon as you switch them around, you put a different hat on, you say, okay, now you sit here. Now tell me, you're running this business. They start talking and focusing in only on the widget. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I find that is important for business owners to realize is to put their consumer hat on when they're sitting there running their own company. Because those customers that are purchasing your company, purchasing your products, they're purchasing your company. They are actually putting their trust in the entire company. And so the entire company, or the entire business, my point is the product you're offering the world, not necessarily the widget that you're selling. And that realization is incredibly important to actually being successful, in my opinion.
Wow. That's a great way of putting it. I've never really thought about it like that. I've thought about it in terms of when, as I mentioned, when there's maybe startups looking to raise money, and how a lot of times the founders focus on the product a lot, and VCs, angel investors, that's secondary. What they really look for is the team, right? Like, who is the team? Who's running this? How are you going to get this done? Because they've been around the block enough to realize that you can have a great idea, but it doesn't mean much if the team can't get you there, right? If you don't have the great parts. And it sounds like this is the same kind of mentality, but on a much wider scale, where, especially that we live in this age of information, misinformation. Some people can use it and be, less aware, but there's also a lot more savvy consumers where people do research on the company, and or you can see how the values of the business owners really permeates through the product itself in so many different ways, right? Where they are leading with that in a certain way, even if it's like in a subliminal way, right? But you're saying it's much more palpable than that in terms of they think about the product, and but really it's what goes into making that product, right? How do you get that product out? What are the different systems that you're making? And so they're looking at the features when, in fact, like you mentioned, they should really be looking at it from a consumer point of view, right? How they'll look at it, and they'll give them a better perspective than maybe they're employing.
Take a more holistic approach to the product. Now, if you, for example, as a consumer, you go, for example, on Amazon and you say, okay, I want to buy X product. That product, the way they look at it is, okay, I see this. It has some of the features I want. The next thing they'll look at is, okay, who's selling it to me? And then they'll look at, okay, how is this thing going to get to me, right? They'll start looking at that. Now, for example, in a situation where you're not a known household brand and you're shipping that stuff out yourself, that consumer, when they look at, oh wait, this company is shipping it out itself, I'm not sure I'm going to get it on time. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to get it. If they see that, for example, Amazon is doing the fulfillment, then they go, okay, well, I think I will do that because I know it'll get there if they're doing the fulfillment. All of those things are pieces of information that they're analyzing in order to do what? To make that purchase, right? To actually say, pull the trigger on this, and they do a whole lot more than that, actually.
Yeah.
So when you're selling a product and you're doing that, and I talk to people all the time, like, oh, you're just coming out with this product? Well, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Have you thought about the other thing? And by and large, a lot of times, they haven't thought about either all of those other factors or at least some of those other factors that make a big difference in terms of whether the consumer pulls that trigger. Now, let's even assume that you say, well, great. So a fewer of them will pull the trigger, but then eventually it'll catch on. Well, okay, yeah, but then how much in marketing dollars do you want to spend? Because every time they look at your product, every time they don't pull the trigger, you've already paid for the marketing. So now, what happens when your conversions go down like that? You're paying more in order to have those sales. So it's a lot of different factors that we don't necessarily take into account how they actually translate into how you end up running your business or whether you can even run that business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, these are, I think, one of these, I see many buckets as well that this is creating problems for. I'm glad that you're able to look at it from a three bucket point of view, because as you speak, I'm like, oh my gosh, this company has so many problems. Because like you said, the marketing dollars, how that goes in there, how is that being paid for, all these different things, and as you said, right, the consumer is looking at all these different factors, and that's why Amazon can charge so much to have your products on their thing, because guess what? The person trusts it's going to get there, right? They look at it, and Amazon's built a level of trust. They're like, we say it's going to be there tomorrow. Guess what? It's going to be there tomorrow. That's what's going to happen, and if not, we're going to make it work. And most of the time it is working out, so, and then you see a lot of great companies that they don't have that. And they get in the logistics issue where they have all this demand and you're waiting 2 or 3 months. You're like, okay, I understand it's a small mom and pop shop. I want to support them, but like, can I get my gym attachment already? Like, it's never coming. What's going on over here?
Yeah, and notice when you're talking about those things, those are real things that you're making decisions on, and the real things where you actually decide, do I buy this product or not buy this product? And it has nothing to do with the specific features of that product. Uh-huh. So a lot of times what happens is, and my point with all that is that you have to look at those things because it makes a difference whether you get the sale of the product, whether the market takes on your product. So that's why, and there's so many aspects to it in actually sitting there and taking that look at your business that I was able to put together an entire book for it, basically.
Love it. Let me, I want to hear more about this book. Plug the book. Tell me. No, I'm being serious. I love this because the truth is that by the time this comes out, the book will be out. If you say it's in 4 weeks, it'll probably be around the time that the episode's actually
Oh,
released.
that's true.
So tell me where it's available, where it's going to be up, and tell me a little bit. I want to get as well into
Hardcover,
the money stuff, in
hardcover,
terms of the budget stuff. But I want to hear about this
hardcover,
book.
softcover, ebook, all on Amazon.
All on Amazon. Once again, it's going to get to your house.
It's selling
Everybody,
on
buy the
Amazon.
book. It'll get there. If
Yeah,
Shawn's
so
sending it by himself and he's in the factory sending it, maybe it won't. But he's trusting Amazon to do it now.
But by the way, my big accomplishment isn't selling a book; is actually doing the book. Because if for people who don't know me, one of the reasons I actually agreed to do, not this is my third one, is that I have the attention span of a gerbil. So putting actually the attention span, putting it together to actually write for that period of time is quite an accomplishment for me. It may be easier for other people, but for me, it's a huge accomplishment. So that's that's what I'm most proud of, is actually being able to put it together.
I'm surprised that you went to school for as long as you did, because listen, I got my degree, I got into medical school, and I decided not to go because I was like, it was tough enough I got great grades somehow by not going to school. Same thing like you, I have my attention span, ADHD kid, which actually, I think, judging on what you're saying as well, it serves us in a certain way having that kind of attention span, because our brains have to be wired differently to do what we do. Right. I think that there's a lot of people who probably the things that you've endured throughout your journey as an entrepreneur, a lot of wins and a lot of things where you're like, okay, well, now next iteration, I get to learn not to do that again. Right. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of people who don't have their brain wired that way would look at that failure and be like, not look at it as like, okay, great. Now I know what to do next time. They're like, well, I'm never doing that again. Like the whole thing. And being able to where we need that kind of a stimulation all the time, and when we can focus into a business, wow, there's a lot of stimulation. There's a lot of ways to get our attention when we're
Yeah.
as an entrepreneur, right? And
Everything, I always say, Maynard, everything is a gift and a curse.
yeah,
So it has its bad sides, and I try to use, my attention span as an advantage as much as I can, and do realize where it's a downside.
yeah,
So
it's true.
that's
It's
the
true.
best thing to do.
Yeah, no, amazing. And one of those things that can grab our attention, I think that's one of the most attention getting things, is our budget, right? I think sometimes we can
You want to go into this?
not look at our budget, and then we're like, oh, what happened? What happened? Or a person can be like, this is going to keep me engaged, and then you forget about some of the other stuff. Tell me about this, because as I mentioned, one of the major buckets that I think about, and I'm glad you mentioned, the buckets, but I always hear about like 80% of companies fail not because they don't have the right product or the right team, because they have a cash flow issue, right? And it could be because of overspending, or it could be because of undermaking, whatever it may be, right? But I think that your outlook is like, how I'll let you give in your words, because I don't even know what you.
Yeah.
How do you run a
So
tight budget while not being cheap? I think people tend to go to the extremes. They don't know how to be kind of that middle ground that it seems that you're suggesting here.
yeah, I always say, run a tight budget, but don't be cheap. And to me, that's incredibly important. By the way, that falls into, because it's, again, to me, a large issue. It can go into any one of those buckets that I mentioned, or be involved in all three of them. You mentioned, essentially sourcing and things like that. That can cause a situation where you're way overspending, and it happens all the time. I meet business owners all the time where they have great products, except that they haven't spent enough time on sourcing the product, and it ends up producing a lot of problems down the line, not just in putting orders, which, per item would cost more, but down the line, it causes all kinds of issues. It takes away from your flexibility in pricing. It takes away from your profitability, obviously, things that you can budget to other places. So it's something that you need to be considering and have in your mind as you're navigating through any of my buckets or any of your buckets, right? Again, it's just how we view different things. So what you will see, and it's funny, you actually hit it right on the head, is that people are on the extremes of it. They're either way overspending, just being out of control, or way underspending and not really paying attention to what they're spending on, as long as they're not spending. So that becomes its own problem. You can be thrifty to the point of putting yourself out of business. So it really happens a lot on the marketing side. I see that happen where people sit there and yank back on marketing in order to make a business profitable, where they need to be dealing more responsibly with other aspects of the business. Because it's easy, because marketing dollars are just going out. What is it? I always use John Wanamaker's quote. Years ago, he was a marketer. And one day when you and I talk, I will tell you how he was involved in coming up with Mother's Day. But anyway, about over a century ago, what he said was, 50% of my marketing is going to waste. I just don't know which half. And so, yes, there can be a lot of waste in marketing because there's a lot of testing in it, and you're dealing with entities, consumers that you don't necessarily know. Consumer taste can change, and they can change on a dime. So there can be a lot of waste in there, and it's an area that you can pull back very quickly and stop spending. But experienced business people will tell you, pull back on marketing last.
Yeah.
Because that's where you're getting your revenues from. That's ultimately it. And that's just one example, by the way. So what ends up happening is we tend to be thrifty in areas where we should be a little bit more, splurging a little bit more, for lack of a better word. And we tend to not be thrifty enough in areas where we should be really, really scrutinizing. And so, those are things that come up all the time, where I meet a business owner and I start looking at the expenses and I look at everything. Of course, you need to be responsible across the board. No question about that. But you need to see where you're actually being cheap, meaning, and I look at being cheap as things that actually hurt the business, and running a tight budget is making sure you know where every single dollar is going, and is it being spent responsibly? Because ultimately you need to spend money in order to make money. And that's actually true, and I believe in it.
100%.
You need to spend in people, you need to spend in marketing, you need to spend in resourcing, all of those things. And so, that's something that I go over with all the time with business owners.
I mean, I'm biased because, marketing's kind of my thing, sales. I'm amazed at the amount of business owners that I talk to that have a great product, and probably I need to focus more on, your business, your product, but they haven't put in that marketing part of their business, right? Like they wonder why they're struggling. And I'm like, great. Well, like, how long have you been doing this or that, or what have you been doing? And they're like, no, and none, and I'm amazed at how they're surprised that their business isn't going, like, they're not getting this amount of sales. It's like they must have seen a Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. And we don't have that in business, actually. We don't have that. Unless it's like a McDonald's and you build a McDonald's in the middle of, and because the company's doing the marketing for you. If you're a franchisee, that's great. Let someone else do that, and you can worry about the operations side more. But
you're still paying for that marketing too.
Yeah, you're still, as a franchisee, you're still paying for that, right? And they own your land, and that's a whole nother thing. I can get into McDonald's is a lot. My dad was actually a franchisee a long time ago, so I know. I grew up in like in a McDonald's, making my own stuff in there and doing my own thing in the back, which is cool. But no, 100%, and you're paying for that. You're paying them to do the marketing, but you're paying a lot, and there's no pulling back that money and saying, well, we're gonna listen, McDonald's, I don't want this money to go there. I want it to go there, because that's why they've stuck around so long, is because they've hacked our brain. They know exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Despite all the changing tastes, like you said, and the people who want to cancel everything, somehow McDonald's is still around, and it's amazing. But I mean, what do you say to somebody when you notice that you got a great product, you have a great business, but your business isn't the way that it would be because you're not spending on marketing, right? Like
part of it comes from a cliche you hear all the time. Oh, this product sells itself.
Yeah.
Right? It sells itself. And I always say, that cliche sounds great, and it's a good way to say I have a great product, but it's not actually true. Nothing sells itself. If that were true, Coca-Cola wouldn't be spending billions
Yeah,
marketing.
yeah.
And then the other thing you'll see, be like, all I need is some celebrity to pick up my product, right? And put it on their Instagram. Okay. Well, if that were true, I think Kim Kardashian just came out with not just, but came out with a brand, that she sells. And if that were true, she's the ultimate person on Instagram. She'd just stick it on her Instagram account. But instead, what she's doing is not only is she doing that, but she's spending a whole lot of money marketing that product and doing all kinds of sponsorships and partnerships and what have you. Why is that? Because that's the way you grow a business. That piece, that marketing piece, never goes away. And so it's not about, oh, suddenly it's going to go viral and that business is going to be around. That stuff is fine and great, but to me those things are lottery tickets, and I don't sell lottery tickets when I'm doing business. That's not a business plan.
And in fact, it can be detrimental to the business. I
Yes.
remember now there's the what do they call it? The Shark Tank effect, right? And
Yeah.
before then, there was the Oprah effect, right? And you saw this, and I'm sure before there was a this and there was a that, but you think that, well, I mean, millions of people saw this thing, and we got like 1 million sales last year. Wow, that's amazing. What was your sales this year? Dead. What
I
is that?
work with a number. I work with a number of Shark Tank winners, and again, you hit it on the head there. That's it. Absolutely is true that way. Just because you win or go on there or get one of those Shark Tank people to invest or however way that goes, that doesn't mean tomorrow you're going to be around.
Yeah,
You have to actually use that. See, I'm not saying that's a negative either, and I'm not
yeah,
saying
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
nothing. I'm saying you have to use that and build on it. That's one piece of how you build your business. It's
yeah.
not everything.
A savvy business owner will use that as part of his marketing technique and then use that as the match to light the fire that's going to keep things going, not as the be
Yeah,
all end all, like, well, Mark Cuban's going to save my business, and then then
I'm done.
and I'm going to bring him on, I'm going to go on there, and everything's going to be great now. And it's just not
Yeah.
right. If you're struggling before you get on Shark Tank, you're probably struggling afterwards. It's really odd. I think about it all the time. And especially now that there's such an emphasis on virality, and you see kids that their whole life passion vision is to like be a content creator, right? And to go viral, and the steps that people go viral. And you see, even with like the Hawk Tuah girl, she's already getting sued, she's already lost the whole thing, and she tried pretty good to like actually you know get her 15 minutes of fame, and she didn't create anything, right? But you can get something out of it, with whether you have a product, you don't have a product. But that people, they emphasize the viral aspect, and I'm like, that's not really marketing, like hoping that just a bunch of people are going to find it and just going to blow up. You can do that, but that's, like you said, it's a lottery ticket, and it's just got to be one small piece of a total marketing strategy, right? So
I mean, that's what I say to people all the time. I'm not selling you a lottery ticket. I'm
yeah,
not saying you won't find some example of this happening out in the world. I can't advocate that as a business plan because I don't think you're maximizing your chances of success. Now, if something like that happens, and if you're working for it or not working for it, and it happens, fantastic. That's not going to be the end all be all. And the people that actually last doing those things are the people who actually work at it ultimately. They have to put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and actually make it happen over and over and over and over. In old times, what would happen is you try to get on like the Today Show. We still do, by the way.
yeah,
Your product gets on the Today Show, and then, oh yeah, geez, okay, yeah, you're going to see a spike in sales. It's going to go like this, and it's going to come right back down, 2 days later. It's not a business plan, and it's not a marketing plan. It's one aspect of something that can happen. And if the Today Show is your marketing plan, you better be planning on being on the Today Show tomorrow and the next day and the next day, every today,
yeah,
or else it's
exactly.
not going to be a marketing
I
plan.
love
It's just
that.
not.
I mean, that's the whole point, right? That's the whole point. I think the idea of wanting to go viral is kind of out of laziness, because I love that exact wording that you said, right? If you want to be on the Today Show, you better be on every today. And that's what it is to be serial entrepreneur, an entrepreneur, a business owner of any kind, is you got to be on every day. Right? This is
Yeah.
not a one time I went viral and now I'm sipping daiquiris, next to Tupac in, in Jamaica or something like that, but
Yeah.
no, it's just like you have to be on every day. And that's the point that people, I think they're like, I'm going to be a content creator. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And thinking like, once I make it, it's just going to be, the best content creators are also great marketers and they're also working their butts off every day. And I think that people don't realize that they're actually business owners pretending to be content creators, because there's a lot of content creators who aren't doing that, or they go viral one time and they can't keep it going, and it never changes. Like I mentioned, my dad, entrepreneur, fourth generation entrepreneur, and the means of marketing were different back then, but you had to still be good at marketing. Whether
Yeah.
it was like a sign that you, or a painting or whatever it was that's going to bring people in off the streets. It's just now we can reach a wider range of people, but I love it. Now I know, obviously being a serial entrepreneur, I'm sorry, for so long, you must be really good at marketing. And I know you mentioned, hey, I work with the few Shark Tank alums over here. So, getting business is probably part of your forte, but what's kind of like maybe the biggest challenge that you're facing now in terms of like getting business or continuing to grow
For
even now?
this company, the way that I sort of started it was, as I told you, it was kind of organic, right? I had this mentorship group essentially that I had formed just by people coming to me. My first thought wasn't marketing, honestly. And it's funny for someone who was a salesperson and a marketer to be saying that, but that was sort of like not top of mind as I formed it. I was sort of trying to figure out the product first when I formed it, because I didn't in my head have a full grasp of what my product is going to be when I first started it. And so since I had this built-in group and this built-in group of people that I was coming to me and that kept increasing, I said, okay, I'm going to keep working at this product and see exactly how it works. And then after that is when I started really pushing out the marketing, the outward reaching it. And then the other thing was that what I wanted to do was, because I wanted to build this relationship where I start with a company and then grow from there to do all these other things that again was part of what I thought was the product. I was looking at what was coming in through the pipeline and what would happen as that expand, as those relationships expanded into other things, and how I was going to be able to handle them. Again, sort of looking at my business being my product, truly. So as we started sort of doing our outbound marketing, seeing exactly how the product developed and how the relationships developed and what it meant in terms of our overhead as we were going along was a challenge. But in terms of getting the challenges of the marketing is exactly where do you go to market. It's a little bit different from some of the things I've done in the past. So there has been a learning curve, even for me, in terms of developing new business, because, okay, where do I go to find my particular client profile, which I formed after I formed the company? And I said, okay, I'm gonna now start, figuring out what my profile is a little bit after I formed the company, which was unusual again for me, because I'm used to sort of, saying, okay, this is what we're selling, this is the widget, and the next thing is, okay, who's gonna buy that widget? I sort of developed that afterwards as I developed the company, because it was just this sort of brainchild that I had that I did. So those things ended up being challenges as we started ramping up our marketing. And then, as you go along, you come across, as we started putting together the vendors that we would be using for our marketing, some of those things were challenging, again, because it was a little bit different from the way I've approached other businesses. And one final thing, one of the things that I had told myself, that this is a challenge to myself, that I was going to do, this was going to be a company, again, unusual for me, that's going to be profitable from day one, and it's going to be profitable month after month. That was my challenge, or I'm not going to do it. So I've been able to keep the company profitable month after month ever since starting it.
I mean, that's great, because you're doing better than Uber, and they're a huge entity, and you're doing better than WeWork ever did. You're doing better than WeWork ever did. It's like everybody's playing with fake money, and just stuff that somebody else's money, that somebody who made money, and they're just using someone else's money and saying, look, were successful when they really haven't, so I love that about, being profitable from day one and putting that forward. And I also love the aspect of the mentorship, and how that's kind of like developed into a thing, because I think, speaking for myself, I wouldn't be anywhere I am at, no matter how my brain is wired and how hard I work and all these kind of things, if it weren't for mentorship, because it would just be me beating my head against the wall over and over trying to figure things out on my own, as opposed to. So I think it's so important. I love giving back as well, having mentors and being a mentee still, right? And I think this kind of helps things continue to grow. And so I love that you have, you have this mentorship and you have mentees and people, and how this has kind of been organically kind of turned into pipeline, so to speak, and all that kind of stuff, even by itself. So, I love all this stuff we shared here. I know you mentioned the book. Anything else exciting here that you want to, first of all, how can people connect with you and ePlaybooks and seek out your services and everything like that? And then we'll get into maybe anything else.
Go to ePlaybooks.com. You also can type in connectwithshawn.com and you'll get to me somehow, apparently.
That is super cool. That is great that it's like, how can we connect with Shawn? Well, have you tried connectwithshawn.com? Wow, that's amazing.
I didn't know that was available at Connect with Shawn.
I mean, that is pretty smart. I may have to yoink that one from you, and I'll give you credit anyways. So like this, I got this from Shawn. Smart guy. Shawn, you're amazing. Anything else you want to plug here? Anything else you're doing, aside from the book? Everybody
I'm
go
good.
get the
Just a pleasure being here. Just a pleasure spending time with you. And yeah, I'm all good.
Shawn, you're the man. I appreciate you. Appreciate you coming on with us today. Everybody check out Shawn. We'll have the links here for it, including connectwithshawn.com, so you can find them easily wherever you listen to this podcast today. And I want to thank everybody else, wherever you are out there, for making this a part of your day. Appreciate you. Can't do it without you. And Shawn, once again, thanks for coming on with us today, with me and our team here as well, doing all the work in the back end. And all the best to you in this year and in the years to come.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. We'll be happy to be back anytime you want to have me.
Thanks, Shawn. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.